Germans couldn't believe bazookas, stopped their Panzers at close range. Until 21. Tanks burned in one night at 11:30 on the night of December 17th, 1944. First Lieutenant Jesse Morrow stood in the freezing darkness outside his battalion command post in Krinkelt, Belgium, watching a Tiger tank crush a jeep. The 60-ton monster rolled forward, slowly, systematically, its tracks grinding the vehicle into twisted metal against the frozen cobblestones. Morrow was a communications officer, 23 years old, from North Carolina. He had never fired a bazooka in combat before. The Tiger's 88mm gun swiveled toward the command post building. Morrow knew what would happen next. One round from that gun would collapse the stone structure, killing everyone inside. His battalion executive officer, his radio operators, his clerks, all the men who kept the battalion functioning would die in the next 10 seconds if that tank fired. A bazooka lay on the ground near the crushed jeep, thrown clear when the tracks had rolled over it. Morrow ran forward, grabbed the weapon, loaded a rocket, and aimed at the tank's rear armor. The M9 bazooka, in his hands, weighed 13.5 pounds. It fired a 2.36-inch rocket with a shaped charge warhead designed to penetrate armor through explosive force concentrated into a narrow jet of superheated gas and molten metal. Against the Tiger's front armor, 100 millimeters of hardened steel sloped at 45 degrees, the rocket would be useless. Against the rear armor, 80 millimeters thick and nearly vertical, it had a chance. Morrow fired. The rocket left the tube with a distinctive whoosh, trailing flame. It struck the Tiger's engine compartment. The tank lurched forward, out of control, and careened into a stone house 20 meters ahead. The engine had stopped. A crew member opened the top hatch and started to climb out. Morrow grabbed his pistol and fired 3 shots. The German dropped back inside. Minutes later, another American soldier threw a thermite grenade down the open hatch. The tank burned. The Germans had been told this wasn't supposed to happen. Their intelligence officers had assessed American anti-tank capabilities thoroughly. The M9 bazooka could penetrate 82 to 102 millimeters of armor under ideal conditions. The Tiger tank's frontal armor was impervious. The Panthers' frontal armor was impervious. Even side shots at oblique angles would likely ricochet. German tank commanders had been briefed that American infantry posed no significant threat to their armor. They could advance through American positions with reasonable confidence that small arms fire and bazookas would be ineffective. They were catastrophically wrong. By dawn on December 18th, 21 German armored fighting vehicles lay destroyed in and around the twin villages of Krinkelt and Rocherath. Most had been killed by American infantry using bazookas, anti-tank mines, and pure desperation. The Germans lost more armor in one night in 2 small Belgian villages than they had in weeks of fighting elsewhere. And the Americans who stopped them weren't elite tank destroyers or heavy armor units. They were ordinary infantrymen, many of them from the 99th Infantry Division, a unit so new that most soldiers had never seen combat before December 16th. What happened at Krinkelt and Rocherath revealed a truth the German High Command had failed to understand. The bazooka wasn't ineffective because of its penetration capabilities. It was effective precisely because German tank doctrine hadn't adapted to close-range urban combat where American infantry could exploit every tactical advantage terrain provided. The Germans had built tanks that could dominate open battlefields. The Americans fought in villages where a 60-ton tank became a blind, lumbering target. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. 3 months earlier, in September 1944, the German army had withdrawn its panzer divisions from the front lines across Western Europe. Allied intelligence officers noticed the pullback, but misinterpreted its significance. Most analysts assumed the Germans were conserving strength, preparing for defensive operations. Some believed the panzer force had been so badly mauled in France that it needed months to rebuild. Both assessments were partially correct, but missed the critical detail. The Germans weren't just rebuilding. They were preparing for one final massive counteroffensive. Adolf Hitler personally conceived the operation in mid-September. He called it Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, a deliberately defensive-sounding code name designed to mask offensive intentions. The plan was audacious to the point of fantasy. 3 German armies would strike through the Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg, the same route Germany had used successfully in 1940. The armoured spearheads would drive west to the Meuse River, then northwest to Antwerp, splitting the British and American armies, encircling 4 Allied armies, and forcing a negotiated peace in the west. This would free all German resources for the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union. The plan required surprise, speed, and overwhelming armoured force concentrated at the point of attack. To achieve surprise, the Germans timed the offensive for mid-December, when weather would ground Allied aircraft. They moved units into position at night, under radio silence, with noise discipline so strict that tracked vehicles were prohibited from starting engines near the front. They spread disinformation suggesting defensive preparations, and they chose the Ardennes specifically because it was the weakest sector of the Allied line. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, had deliberately thinned the Ardennes sector. The terrain favored defense. The region was heavily forested, with deep river valleys and a limited road network. Only 4 good roads ran east to west through the entire sector. Eisenhower stationed 6 American divisions along an 80-mile front, roughly 1 division per 13 miles. The units assigned there were either inexperienced formations sent to a quiet sector for training or exhausted divisions pulled from heavy fighting elsewhere for rest and refitting. The German 6th Panzer Army, commanded by SS Oberstgruppenführer Josef Dietrich, would lead the main assault on the northern shoulder of the attack. Dietrich commanded over 700 tanks, tank destroyers, and assault guns. His force included 2 full SS Panzer divisions, the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, and the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend. Both were elite formations, fanatically loyal, extensively trained, and equipped with the best armor Germany could field. The 12th SS Panzer Division, commanded by SS Standartenführer Hugo Krass, fielded 72 tanks and assault guns, including Panthers, Panzer IVs, and supporting Jagdpanzer of 4 tank destroyers. The division's Panzer Grenadier regiments had trained together since 1943. Many soldiers were teenagers, hence the division nickname Hitlerjugend, Hitler Youth. But they had seen extensive combat in Normandy and had earned a reputation for aggressive, often ruthless tactics. The 12th SS's assigned route ran through the twin villages of Krinkelt and Rocherath, across Elsenborn Ridge, then northwest toward Malmedy Spa and Liège. Control of Elsenborn Ridge was critical. The ridge commanded all the roads west. Any German unit that failed to secure it would be flanked from the high ground and subjected to devastating artillery fire from American guns positioned on the ridgetop. The villages were key terrain. 3 main supply routes converged there. Whoever controlled Krinkelt and Rocherath controlled access to the ridge. The American forces defending the area comprised elements of the 2nd Infantry Division and the 99th Infantry Division. This 2nd Division, nicknamed Indian Head after its shoulder patch, was a veteran formation. It had fought since D-Day, participated in the Normandy breakthrough, and sustained heavy casualties across France. In early December, the division had been pulled north to attack German positions near Wallerscheid, a fortified crossroads 5 miles north of Krinkelt. The attack had been grinding, costly, and ultimately successful. By December 16th, the 2nd Division held Wallerscheid, but was exhausted, dispersed, and vulnerable. The 99th Infantry Division, nicknamed Checkerboard, had arrived in Europe in November 1944. Most soldiers had never been in combat. The division held defensive positions along the German border near Losheimer Graben and south towards Sol Krinkelt. The men were green, undertrained, and stretched thin. German intelligence identified them as easy targets. On paper, the 99th should have collapsed within hours of the initial assault. At 05:30, on the morning of December 16th, 1944, German artillery opened fire along the entire Ardennes front. Over 1,800 guns fired simultaneously. The barrage lasted 90 minutes. American forward positions were pulverized. Communication lines were cut. Observation posts were destroyed. Men huddled in foxholes and bunkers, while high-explosive shells churned the frozen ground into mud and shrapnel tore through trees. When the barrage lifted at 0700, German infantry advanced through the morning fog. The weather was exactly as planned. Heavy cloud cover, fog in the valleys, visibility less than 100 meters in most areas. Allied aircraft were grounded. American forward units reported attacks all along the line, but higher headquarters couldn't determine the scale or focus of the assault. Was this a local counterattack, a spoiling attack to disrupt Allied offensive preparations, or something larger? By mid-morning, the scale became clear. 3 German armies were attacking simultaneously. The northern shoulder, defended by the 5th Corps, faced the full weight of the 6th Panzer Army. German troops overran forward American positions. Units of the 99th Division fell back fighting. The inexperienced soldiers performed better than anyone expected. They didn't panic. They didn't break. They delayed. They inflicted casualties, and they withdrew in relatively good order toward the twin villages. Major General Walter Robertson, commanding the 2nd Infantry Division, recognized the threat immediately. His division was dispersed, with 2 regiments at Wallerscheid, 6 miles north, and only 1 regiment near Würzfeld in reserve. If the Germans broke through the 99th Division and seized Krinkelt and Rocherath, they would cut off the regiments at Wallerscheid completely. Robertson made rapid decisions. He ordered his 9th and 38th Infantry regiments to break off their attack at Wallerscheid and withdraw south to defend the twin villages. He ordered his 23rd Infantry Regiment, in reserve near Würzfeld, to move forward and establish defensive positions. He committed his division to holding Krinkelt, Rocherath, and the approaches to Elsenborn Ridge. The withdrawal from Wallerscheid began on the afternoon of December 17th. The 9th and 38th Infantry Regiments pulled back along a single narrow road through dense forest. German forces harried them. Artillery fire bracketed the road. Small arms fire came from the flanks. The withdrawal was disciplined but difficult. Units became intermixed. Casualties mounted. Men were exhausted, cold, and running low on ammunition. As the 2nd Division troops withdrew toward the villages, elements of the 99th Division fell back through Krinkelt and Rocherath from the east. The town filled with American soldiers from different units trying to establish defensive positions. There was no coherent front line. Small groups of men occupied houses, cellars, and street corners. Communication was difficult. Many radios had been lost or damaged. Officers improvised command posts in basements and barns. German intelligence had assessed that once their Panzer Grenadiers broke through the initial American defenses, the 12th SS Panzer Division's tanks would advance rapidly through Krinkelt and Rocherath, across open country beyond, and onto Elsenborn Ridge by nightfall on December the 17th. The villages themselves were not expected to pose significant resistance. They were small farming communities, stone buildings clustered along narrow streets. The Panthers and Panzer IVs would simply drive through, infantry would mop up any resistance, and the advance would continue. The first German tanks entered Krinkelt shortly after darkness fell on December 17th. 5 Panthers from the 1st Company of SS Panzer Regiment 12 pushed into the village from the southeast around 1930 hours. The lead tank commander expected light resistance. He had been told American infantry would withdraw rather than face German armor in close combat. Instead, his tank was hit by 3 separate bazooka rockets within 2 minutes. The first rocket struck the turret side, penetrating the 80mm armor and igniting ammunition inside. The turret exploded, killing the entire crew instantly. The 2nd Panther tried to reverse, but hit a mine planted in the street earlier that evening by American engineers. The mine detonated under the tank's belly, shattering the hull and immobilizing it. A bazooka team fired at the disabled tank, from a basement window 30 meters away. The rocket penetrated the side armor. The tank caught fire. The remaining 3 Panthers tried to advance, but found the street blocked by the burning wrecks. They attempted to turn around in the narrow intersection. The maneuver exposed their weaker side armor. Bazooka teams fired from multiple directions. Rockets struck 2 tanks. One was disabled immediately. The other continued moving, but with its turret jammed. A soldier ran from a doorway and threw a thermite grenade onto the engine deck. The Panther burned. The final tank commander gave up and withdrew, his vehicle trailing smoke from multiple bazooka hits. 5 Panthers destroyed in less than 15 minutes. The 12th SS Panzer Division had expected to lose tanks to American tank destroyers, to artillery, perhaps to mines. They had not expected to lose an entire tank platoon to infantry in a village. German tank doctrine emphasized mobility, firepower, and armor protection in open terrain combat. Urban combat was considered unfavorable but manageable. Tanks would suppress infantry positions with machine gun fire and high explosive rounds. Panzer grenadiers would clear buildings. The tanks would then proceed. But in Krinkelt's narrow streets, the tanks became targets instead of weapons. Their advantages disappeared. Superior mobility meant nothing when streets were blocked by rubble and burning vehicles. Long-range firepower was useless when the enemy was 30 meters away in a basement. Thick frontal armor didn't matter when bazookas could fire at side and rear aspects from any direction. The Panthers were blind. Their vision devices provided limited peripheral awareness. The commanders had to expose themselves in open hatches to see properly, which made them vulnerable to small arms fire. The Americans exploited every advantage. They waited until tanks were committed to narrow streets with no room to maneuver. They fired from basements, upper floors, doorways. They used mines to channel tanks into kill zones. They attacked, disabled tanks repeatedly to ensure they burned. They coordinated bazooka teams with covering fire, and they understood something the Germans had forgotten. In close combat, courage and desperation mattered more than armor thickness. The German response to the disaster in Krinkelt was predictable. They committed more armor. If 5 Panthers couldn't break through, 20 would. Throughout the night of December 17th and into the early morning of December 18th, the 12th SS Panzer Division poured tanks and infantry into the twin villages. Panthers, Panzer IVs, and infantry, mounted on half-tracks, pushed into Krinkelt and Rocherath from multiple directions. The assault was relentless, professional, and exactly what German doctrine prescribed for breaking through a defended position. The Americans had approximately 300 yards of frontage to defend in each village. The streets were narrow, lined with 2-story stone houses, its barns, and farm buildings. Every structure became a strong point. Every intersection became a kill zone. The 2nd Infantry Division's soldiers occupied cellars and upper floors. They piled furniture against windows for protection. They knocked firing holes through walls. They positioned themselves to cover streets from multiple angles. Private First Class William Soderman was 23 years old, from Detroit, Michigan. He had been in Europe since November. On the night of December 18th, Soderman was positioned in a house on the western edge of Rocherath with a bazooka and 4 rockets. His squad had been assigned to hold that position and prevent German tanks from advancing toward Würzfeld. Around midnight, Soderman heard engines. A German tank column was approaching. At least 3 tanks, possibly more in the darkness behind them. Soderman waited until the lead tank was less than 30 yards from his position. He aimed at the side armor, the junction between the hull and turret, and fired. The rocket struck cleanly. The tank stopped, smoke pouring from the hit. The crew bailed out. Soderman reloaded and fired at the 2nd tank. Another hit, this time on the engine deck. The tank caught fire, illuminating the street. The 3rd tank tried to reverse, but backed into a building, damaging its track. Soderman fired his 3rd rocket. The tank exploded. The remaining German tanks withdrew. Soderman had stopped an entire column with 3 rockets and given away his position with muzzle flashes. German infantry immediately began firing at the house. Machine gun bullets tore through the walls. Soderman and his squad withdrew through a back door, running through gardens and side streets to reach another defensive position. Soderman would later receive the Medal of Honor for his actions that night, one of 5 American soldiers awarded the nation's highest decoration for the fighting at Krinkelt and Rocherath. The Germans adapted. They learned quickly that advancing down streets in column formation was suicidal. They began using different tactics. Tanks would fire high explosive rounds into buildings systematically before advancing. Infantry would clear structures room by room before tanks moved forward. They used smoke to obscure their movements. They concentrated overwhelming force at specific points to break through rather than advancing on a broad front. But the Americans adapted faster. They positioned anti-tank mines in patterns that forced tanks into predictable paths. They coordinated multiple bazooka teams to engage the same target simultaneously, increasing the probability of hits. They used artillery fire from Elsenborn Ridge to bracket German formations, forcing them to move in directions where bazookas waited. And they discovered that even when bazookas didn't penetrate armor, repeated hits could disable tanks by damaging tracks, optics, engine compartments, and external equipment. Lieutenant Colonel William McKinley, commanding the 1st Battalion of the 9th Infantry Regiment, established his command post in a cellar in northern Krinkelt. Throughout December 18th, German tanks repeatedly attempted to overrun his position. McKinley organized every available soldier into makeshift anti-tank teams: clerks, radio operators, supply personnel. Anyone who could carry a bazooka or throw a mine became a tank hunter. The battalion's official after-action report recorded 7 German tanks destroyed within 100 yards of the command post in a 6-hour period. The fighting was savage. German and American soldiers fought separated by narrow streets, sometimes by single walls. Word spread through American ranks that SS troops were executing prisoners and bayoneting wounded. The Americans responded in kind. Quarter was neither given nor expected. When tanks were disabled, American soldiers would attempt to kill the crews as they escaped. When buildings were captured, no prisoners were taken. The battle devolved into a close-range killing match where both sides fought with desperate intensity. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Near Lieutenant Morrow's command post, the Tiger tank he had disabled on December 17th still smoldered. By dawn on December 18th, 5 more German tanks had been destroyed in the same intersection. The street was impassable, blocked by burning wrecks. German engineers tried to clear the obstacles under fire. American artillery targeted the intersection continuously. Bodies of German and American dead lay frozen in the streets, casualties from the house-to-house fighting that continued through the night. Major General Robertson understood his division couldn't hold the villages indefinitely. German forces were overwhelming. More Panzer units were being committed. The 12th SS Panzer Division alone fielded 72 tanks and assault guns. Additional armor from the 1st SS Panzer Division was moving north to reinforce the attack. American casualties were mounting. Ammunition was running critically low. Many units were down to their last few bazooka rockets, their last few artillery rounds. But Robertson also understood that every hour his division held, Krinkelt and Rusherath, was an hour that American reinforcements could move into position on Elsenborn Ridge. The 1st Infantry Division, the big red one, was moving north to reinforce the ridge. Additional artillery battalions were deploying. If the 2nd Division could delay the Germans for 24 to 36 hours, the ridge could be held, and if the ridge was held, the entire northern shoulder of the German offensive would collapse. Robertson ordered his division to hold through December 18th, then withdraw to Elsenborn Ridge on the night of December 18th to 19th. The withdrawal would be conducted in stages, with units leapfrogging back through successive defensive lines. It would be dangerous, requiring discipline and coordination under fire, but it was the only option that gave both the 2nd Division and the ridge position a chance. On December 18th, the 12th SS Panzer Division committed its heaviest armor. Tiger tanks, the most feared German armor in the West, entered the battle. The Tiger Y mounted an 88mm gun and had frontal armor up to 100mm thick. Against American Sherman tanks, the Tiger was nearly invincible frontally. Against American infantry with bazookas, the Tiger had the same vulnerabilities as any other tank in urban combat. It was blind, it was slow, and its side and rear armor could be penetrated at close range. Near Rusherath's church, Two Tigers advanced down the main street supported by infantry. American soldiers watched from concealed positions. The lead Tiger reached the center of the village. A mine detonated under its left track, immobilizing it. The Tiger could still fire, and did, its 88mm gun destroying two American-occupied buildings with high explosive rounds. But it couldn't move. Bazooka teams crept forward through destroyed buildings, using rubble for cover. They fired from 3 directions simultaneously. Multiple rockets struck the Tiger's side and rear. The tank caught fire. The crew attempted to escape. Only one survived. The second Tiger tried to maneuver around the burning wreck but became stuck between 2 buildings, its width too great for the narrow passage. The tank was trapped, unable to advance or reverse. American soldiers poured gasoline over the engine deck and ignited it. The crew abandoned the tank before it exploded. Both Tigers destroyed. 2 60-ton behemoths rendered useless by terrain they couldn't navigate, and infantry they couldn't see. By late afternoon, on December 18th, the German offensive in the twin villages had stalled completely. The 12th SS Panzer Division reported 21 armored vehicles destroyed or disabled, with additional losses in half-tracks and other vehicles. Casualties among Panzer Grenadiers were severe. The division's advance had covered less than 2 miles in 2 days, far behind the schedule Hitler's plan required. The 12th SS should have been approaching the Meuse River. Instead, they were still fighting for 2 Belgian farming villages. SS Standartenführer Hugo Kraas, commanding the division, reported the situation to higher headquarters. His tanks were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. His infantry was exhausted. The Americans were fighting with unexpected determination. The terrain favored defense. The villages were death traps for armor. He recommended bypassing Krinkelt and Rocherath, finding alternate routes west. His recommendation was denied. Orders from 6th Panzer Army headquarters were explicit. Take the villages. Secure Elsenborn Ridge. There were no alternate routes that could support an armored division's logistical requirements. Kraas committed his division to one more major assault on the night of December 18th. Every available tank, every Panzer Grenadier company would attack simultaneously from multiple directions. The assault would be supported by artillery, by Nebelwerfer rocket launchers, by everything the division could bring to bear. They would overwhelm the American defenders through sheer weight of numbers and firepower. The assault began at 2200 hours. German artillery pounded the villages for 30 minutes. Then the tanks advanced. Infantry close behind. They came from the east, from the south, from the southeast. Dozens of tanks converging on the narrow streets. The Americans responded with everything they had left. Artillery fire from Elsenborn Ridge bracketed the German formations. Every bazooka team engaged. Mines detonated. Machine guns fired until barrels glowed red. The fighting lasted through the night. German tanks penetrated deep into both villages. American positions were overrun, then retaken in counterattacks. Buildings collapsed. Fires spread. The streets became landscapes of destruction, littered with burning vehicles and dead soldiers. But the American line held. The Germans couldn't break through to open ground beyond. They couldn't clear the villages. Every advance was contained, every penetration sealed. At dawn, on December 19th, Major General Robertson ordered the withdrawal to begin. Units would pull back in sequence, covered by artillery and by units that would hold until the last possible moment. The withdrawal began at 0600. By mid-morning, most of the 2nd Division had successfully disengaged and moved to positions on Elsenborn Ridge. Rearguard elements fought delaying actions through the morning, then withdrew under covering fire. By noon on December 19th, the twin villages were in German hands. The 12th SS Panzer Division had finally achieved its initial objective, 72 hours behind schedule, but the victory was Pyrrhic. The division had lost over 30% of its armor. Casualties among infantry exceeded 1,000 men. The Americans held Elsenborn Ridge in strength, with artillery positioned to dominate every approach. The 12th SS attempted to assault the ridge on December 20th. They were repulsed with heavy losses. They tried again on December 21st. Same result. The northern shoulder of the German offensive had failed. The Americans lost approximately 600 men killed, wounded, or captured in the fighting for Krinkelt and Rocherath. They lost dozens of vehicles, tons of equipment, and expended vast quantities of ammunition. But they achieved their objective. They delayed the German armored spearhead long enough for reinforcements to secure the critical terrain. The ridge never fell. The 6th Panzer Army never broke through. The entire northern wing of Hitler's offensive ground to a halt against American positions that should have collapsed in the first 24 hours. The German High Command analyzed what went wrong at Krinkelt and Rocherath for weeks after the battle. The tactical reports from the 12th SS Panzer Division painted a clear picture. American infantry had used bazookas with unexpected effectiveness, not because the weapon had suddenly become more powerful, but because the Americans had exploited terrain that negated German armor advantages. The lessons were documented in division after-action reports, forwarded to higher headquarters, and largely ignored. By late December 1944, Germany lacked the resources to fundamentally change how it employed armor. The broader impact of the Twin Villages battle became clear within days. The failure of the 6th Panzer Army's northern thrust forced the German offensive to rely entirely on the 5th Panzer Army's advance further south. That army made better initial progress, but still failed to reach the Meuse River. The entire Ardennes offensive, which Hitler had conceived as Germany's last chance to force a negotiated peace in the West, ground down into a battle of attrition. Germany couldn't win. By late January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was over. Germany had lost over 100,000 men, 600 armored vehicles, and consumed fuel reserves it couldn't replace. American intelligence officers studied the Krinkelt-Rocherath engagement carefully. They identified specific tactical innovations that had proven effective. Bazooka teams operating in pairs with one soldier loading while another fired, increased rate of fire and survivability. Positioning teams in basements and upper floors simultaneously created overlapping fields of fire that prevented tanks from finding safe positions. Using mines to channel armor into predictable kill zones maximized bazooka effectiveness. Coordinating artillery fire with infantry anti-tank operations suppressed German infantry support and forced tanks to operate without protection. These lessons were distributed to other units throughout the European theater. Training programs emphasized urban combat tactics. Soldiers were taught how to identify tank vulnerabilities, how to position for optimal shot angles, how to coordinate multiple bazooka teams. The M9 bazooka remained technically inadequate against heavy German armor in open terrain, but properly employed in restrictive terrain, it became a genuine threat. Private First Class William Soderman survived the war. He returned to Detroit in 1945, received the Medal of Honor from President Harry Truman, and lived quietly until his death in 1980. He rarely discussed his combat experiences. When asked about the night he destroyed 3 German tanks, he typically said he had been terrified, acted on instinct, and considered himself lucky to survive. He didn't consider himself a hero. He had simply done what circumstances required. First Lieutenant Jesse Morrow recovered from his wounds and returned to duty. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions at Krinkelt. After the war, he completed law school, practiced in North Carolina, and remained active in 2nd Infantry Division veterans organizations. He attended reunions regularly and maintained friendships with men he had served alongside. Morrow died in 2005 at age 84. His obituary mentioned his law career and community service, but devoted only one sentence to his wartime decorations. The men who fought at Krinkelt and Rocherath generally didn't emphasize their service. They had survived. That was enough. Major General Walter Robertson continued commanding the 2nd Infantry Division until the war's end. His decision to commit his division to holding the Twin Villages while withdrawing under fire was later studied at military staff colleges as an example of tactical flexibility under pressure. Robertson understood that holding ground permanently wasn't the objective. Buying time was the objective. His division accomplished that mission despite being outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting elite German formations in terrain that should have favored the attacker. The 2nd Infantry Division's casualties in the Battle of the Bulge exceeded 3,000 men. The division's combat effectiveness was temporarily reduced, but by February 1945, replacements had arrived, equipment had been replaced, and the division returned to offensive operations. They crossed into Germany, fought through the Siegfried Line, and participated in the final destruction of German forces in the Ruhr Pocket. The division's wartime service ended in Czechoslovakia in May 1945. The 12th SS Panzer Division never recovered from its losses in the Ardennes. The division withdrew east, fought delaying actions through Germany, and surrendered to American forces in Austria in May 1945. SS Standartenführer Hugo Krass survived the war, was held as a prisoner until 1948, and died in 1980. He never publicly discussed the Twin Villages battle in detail, but former division members who wrote unit histories acknowledged that the engagement had been the division's worst tactical defeat in the West. The villages themselves were largely destroyed. Krinkelt and Rocherath were rebuilt after the war, but many original structures were too damaged to save. The streets where Panthers and Tigers had burned were repaved. The houses where American soldiers had fought were replaced with modern buildings. By the 1960s, little physical evidence of the battle remained visible to casual observers. Today, small memorials mark specific locations. A plaque near Krinkelt's church commemorates the 2nd Infantry Division's stand. Another memorial honors the 99th Infantry Division. Tour groups visit occasionally, led by historians who explain the tactical significance of intersections and buildings that no longer exist. The local museum preserves photographs, artifacts, and personal accounts from both sides. But for most visitors, the peaceful Belgian countryside makes it difficult to imagine the violence that consumed these villages for 3 days in December 1944. The broader lesson of Krinkelt and Rocherath extended beyond specific tactical innovations. The battle demonstrated that technological superiority didn't guarantee victory when inferior forces exploited terrain effectively. German tanks were objectively superior to American tanks in armor protection, firepower, and mechanical reliability, but in restrictive terrain, those advantages disappeared. The 60-ton Tiger tank became a liability when it couldn't maneuver. The Panthers' sloped armor meant nothing when bazookas could fire at side aspects from 30 meters away. The Americans won not because they had better equipment, but because they fought intelligently. They used buildings for cover and concealment. They positioned weapons to cover dead space. They coordinated fires. They adapted tactics based on enemy responses. They accepted casualties to achieve objectives. And most importantly, they understood that holding terrain temporarily could be more valuable than holding it permanently if that delay enabled larger strategic objectives. The German failure at Krinkelt and Rocherath contributed directly to the failure of Hitler's entire Ardennes offensive. The 6th Panzer Army's inability to break through the northern shoulder meant the 5th Panzer Army's southern advance operated without flank protection. American reinforcements could concentrate against the exposed southern thrust without worrying about being cut off from the north. The German logistics network, already inadequate, became completely unsustainable when the offensive failed to capture fuel supplies and road networks on the planned schedule. By January 1945, the strategic situation in Europe had become hopeless for Germany. The Red Army was advancing in the east. The Western Allies had resumed their advance toward the Rhine. Germany's industrial capacity was being systematically destroyed by strategic bombing. Fuel shortages were crippling. Trained personnel couldn't be replaced. The Ardennes offensive had consumed Germany's last mobile reserves without achieving any meaningful objective. The men who fought at Krinkelt and Rocherath didn't know they were participating in a decisive battle. They were focused on immediate survival, on the next German tank, on whether they had enough ammunition for another engagement. Only later, after analyzing the entire offensive, did historians recognize that the Twin Villages battle had been one of the critical moments where American determination stopped German momentum at the precise point where stopping it mattered most. Hey, thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. Wars are decided by thousands of small actions that collectively determine outcomes. A lieutenant grabbing a discarded bazooka, a private first class waiting until a tank was 30 yards away before firing, engineers planting mines in darkness, artillery observers calling fire missions from exposed positions, radio operators maintaining communications under bombardment, medics treating wounded under fire. Each action, individually insignificant, contributed to a result that changed history. The German belief that American infantry couldn't stop their panzers was technically correct on open battlefields, but warfare rarely occurs on ideal terrain. It occurs in forests, villages, cities, mountains, places where technological advantages diminish and human factors dominate. At Krinkelt and Rocherath, American soldiers with inadequate weapons defeated German soldiers with superior equipment because they fought smarter, adapted faster, and refused to quit when the situation appeared hopeless. That lesson remains relevant. Superior technology provides advantages but doesn't guarantee victory. Terrain matters, tactics matter, training matters, morale matters, leadership matters. The side that integrates these factors effectively wins, regardless of what equipment charts suggest should happen. On December 17th, 1944, German tank commanders believed American bazookas couldn't stop their advance. By December 19th, 21 burning tanks proved them wrong. The weapon hadn't changed. The tactical situation had, and that made all the difference.